Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you all for coming. I also want to introduce quickly our partners, DonorSearch. We've got Nathan and Scott. And the way this talk will work, I'm going to spend a little bit of time introducing DataRobot, the company and the platform, who we are, and what we've been up to lately in terms of generative AI. And then we're going to open it up to a panel discussion and talk about how DonorSearch has been using the DataRobot platform and the types of predictive and generative problems that they're looking to solve. And then for the last 5 minutes, we're going to open it up to questions as well. So a little bit about DataRobot, who we are and where we've come from. We are a little over 10 years old. We have an end-to-end AI and ML platform. Think of us like a workbench where folks can bring their data, build predictive models, build generative models, and then more importantly, deploy them into production and monitor, manage, and govern them over time, which is particularly important for LLMs in generative AI, especially when trust becomes a top concern. We work with thousands of customers, the majority of the Fortune 500. We install our software either on-prem or across any of the major cloud providers. And we've got a whole bunch of accolades you can see there on the bottom right of the screen. The other thing I want to quickly highlight is how the tool and the platform is agnostic. We've got a bunch of different clients across all sorts of industries and verticals. We solve a really long tail of diverse use cases, and it doesn't really matter what that particular use case is or what vertical you're working in. In terms of where we fit, if you read this screen from the bottom up, we really sit on top of your data layer. So regardless of where you store your data, we'll connect to your data source, and we like to think of our platform as the intelligence layer that sits on top. So we'll ingest your data, we'll apply all sorts of ML algorithms, generative models, derive those insights, and then we'll push or surface the predictions and the explanations to that topmost layer where end consumers will actually consume the predictions, that visualization layer. Think your Click, Looker, Tableau, CRM systems, etc. And if we really focus into what that intelligence layer means, it's broken down into these 3 different layers. The first and foremost is the build or experimentation layer. That's in the very bottom. And the idea is that once you point data at our platform, whether it's totally unstructured, free text, if it's images, video, numeric features, structured, we'll actually grab all of that and then help you really quickly develop models. We'll also help you experiment with the right setup. So if you aren't sure whether for your particular use case, it's better to go with OpenAI in terms of an LLM, Anthropic with their Claude model, maybe a Bedrock model or something from Google's Model Garden, we offer a sandbox or playground where you can really quickly iterate and understand what that most optimal structure or pipeline is. The next step, once you're happy with the approach and what we call the blueprint, effectively the recipe, we help you govern that. So we've got all the appropriate guardrails, the compliance documentation, the audit trails, and the registry and the catalog, so you can version all of that work and get it approved both internally as well as externally, especially for sensitive use cases. And the final step on that topmost layer is to take and package up all the work and push that into production. So you deploy these models into the real world, and this is the most important step, you actively monitor it thereafter. So as folks are interacting with your models, your applications, let's say we've built a chatbot powered by one of OpenAI's GPT models, how can you monitor and govern the output so that you can ensure the responses are on topic, they're relevant, they're appropriate, they don't contain any harmful language, they're factual, so they don't contain hallucinations. That whole monitoring suite is built in our platform, so you can easily add that governance layer. In terms of generative AI in particular, the space is moving really, really quickly. In fact, this slide is already out of date. We made it a couple weeks ago. And the idea is that every week, almost every hour, more of these modeling frameworks are coming out. So from a development perspective, we were really strategic in thinking about how to help future-proof your tech stack. It's really difficult if you were to fully commit to a single vendor and be single-threaded, or even to a single LLM type. On one hand, we've realized that the choice of model is really sensitive. For some use cases, a certain model works really well. For others, it does not work nearly as well. And as new models get released, you've got examples of better functionality, an easier way to build agents with function calling. You've got different data breaches. Everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with what happened to OpenAI over the past couple of weeks. It's really important for us as a platform, then, to make sure that we're highly interoperable. We want to make it really easy for you all to substitute in or out any of these different modeling frameworks. So our value add is the ability to quickly understand which approach works the best for your use case, and then help you package it up, move it to deployment, and then monitor it and govern it over time. The other really important trend that we've noticed in the industry is that there's a whole lot of what we're calling model sprawl. And it started well before generative AI. Companies, as they begin to embrace AI and ML more and more, are building and deploying more models. And it's really hard to get visibility into the models running across your org just to keep an inventory. Generative AI only exacerbated that. If you think about these LLMs as text in, text out, it's a lot easier to wrap your head around. And it's a lot easier to play around and prototype different solutions. So across our client base, there's tons of examples in different centralized teams, in lines of business, or different BUs, of people testing out different models, different strategies. It's really hard to have a single framework that's understanding and governing everything that's going on, which makes the monitoring component that much more important. In terms of our strategy, as far as choosing a specific model goes, there are really three different categories, and this is somewhat high level. The first on the left there is the ability to actually grab a third-party API, and there are pros and cons to all of these. So these are the types of models that you're probably most familiar with. You've got OpenAI, you've got Anthropic, Cohere, Amazon's Bedrock, Google's Bison. The pro is that these are some of the largest models. They're the most accurate, and they're supported by some of the world's largest companies. The cons are that you don't actually control them. It requires you sending your data outside your network to their servers, and you also cannot control how often they're changed or updated. Plus, these bigger, better models can be a lot costlier too. And depending on the use case, it's appropriate to choose any one of these three strategies. The second strategy, open source models. You've probably heard of Falcon, Llama 2, Mistral. They're a lot harder to manage and deploy yourself, but you do have full control. Your data doesn't necessarily need to leave the environment, and depending on the hardware required, might be a little less costly. And then finally, for the smallest subset of use cases, you need the ability to either fine-tune models or build LLM from scratch. So we'll cover all these topics in the panel discussion coming up next. I've got a few more slides about the generative aspect of the platform, and then, like I said, we'll ask Nathan and Scott some questions. So in terms of the generative offerings, there are two pieces here. There's the experimentation, where you're prototyping solutions, and then there's the deployment and monitoring. Our approach on the experimentation side is to make it really easy to test out different LLMs and then different grounding strategies. This is a RAG, or retrieval augmented generation approach, with vector databases that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with. And the idea here is that LLMs tend to hallucinate. They super confidently give you the wrong answer. And if you don't provide the right context during the prompt, they can often end up with this unfactual or incorrect response. So grabbing the most relevant data and including it tends to help avoid that. And then on the production side, there's a lot of LLM-specific monitoring techniques that you'll want to employ, and you want to get insight not only into how the model's responding, but how users are interacting with the model. So if you were to build a chatbot, it's super important to understand the types of questions that users are asking and any feedback that they're providing. All right. The last few slides here touch on the actual platform. So these are slides and screenshots from the DataRobot generative workbench. These sections are the ability to prep your data, so you prepare that grounding data. You've got the ability, like I mentioned earlier, to prototype and test a bunch of these different LLMs in the playground to understand how the responses change. Then you've got the ability to dig in and understand how different prompts affect the output and where certain users or questions, when they ask the model, tend to produce better or worse answers. And that's often a result of the data you feed into these vector databases. And then finally, there's the safety and trust, which I suspect will be the main topic of our panel discussion here. How do you actually trust the models, and how can you become confident with your output? Confident enough to deploy these into production. And the final point that I want to touch on, and I think this is unique to DataRobot and probably one of the most important things I'll mention while standing up here, is this intersection between what I'm calling predictive AI, think traditional AI and ML, and generative. There's a whole bunch of applications, and we were lucky enough to have built a platform over a decade ago that has a core engine to quickly build highly accurate predictive models. So there are different ways to incorporate this predictive approach to govern or audit the output of generative AI, and ways to leverage generative AI to actually translate predictions from traditional predictive AI models. I'm going to skip through the last example here and turn it over here to Nathan and Scott. So, gentlemen, let me sit down. First, could you do me a favor and just introduce your roles in DonorSearch?
Sure. I'm Scott Rosenkrans. I'm Associate Vice President at DonorSearch AI. I oversee our data science team in building custom machine learning models for nonprofits, predicting who's going to make the next gift out of all their constituents, who has the highest likelihood and quantified connection to that organization to be philanthropic in the future.
Yeah, and I'm Nathan Chappell. I'm the Senior Vice President of the DonorSearch AI team, and have worked with Scott in machine learning since 2017, where we essentially built the first algorithm to predict generosity. I think when people hear the word DonorSearch, sometimes they think we're like looking for people who are going to donate organs. That is not us. We're on the other side of the donation. So if you're going to donate money to a nonprofit organization, for many years, most nonprofit organizations looked at people that were wealthy, and they would try to convert those people to give. And we've used ML and deep learning to really kind of change the way nonprofits operate.
Can you tell us a bit about how you've used DataRobot and the types of problems that you've solved?
Yeah, so I mean, for us, huge. So like, you know, I spent 20 years, I was actually a technologist. I started and sold 2 companies 20-something years ago. I ended up in nonprofit for 20 years. And by large margin, most nonprofit organizations segment good versus bad prospective donors based on how wealthy they are. And it's a really bad practice that's led to a lot of, you know, actually a pretty steady decline in the number of people that participate in any type of charitable giving. And the reason for that is because it's very much a shotgun approach. So like most, you know, consumer organizations, it's just trying to think that you could sell a pair of shoes to everyone in the world. It's very different than understanding your exact, you know, target market with a high degree of precision. So our work in data science from early on until now has really been about understanding the true motivations of giving, and then bringing a really high degree of precision to our clients in terms of who's a person that either is going to make another gift, or a person that's going to make their first gift based on their connection to the organization.
And the way we've been able to use DataRobot in doing that, prior, like Nathan said, we've been doing this for 6 years. We started with one data scientist who was hard coding these models for our clients. And that was not scalable, but also not transparent. I was managing that data scientist, and I still didn't know how these models were built. I didn't know what the top features were. So it was not an efficient solution, especially for a sector that relies on trust, right? More so than the for-profit sector. Nonprofits are just inherently, they need to depend on trust, and they're not trusting by nature, right? And so by coming to DataRobot, we're obviously able to scale significantly faster than we could before, but also have full layers of transparency, where we open up the models, work with our clients so that they have full oversight into how their models are being built. And it's not, we're just delivering to them, telling them to trust the scores and move along.
Can you speak a bit more about how that explainability works? What are your end clients actually looking at when you provide some of these models?
Yeah, so we work with hospitals, we work with higher ed institutions, we work with membership organizations, but we can go into the level of detail for a certain hospital and say, the provider that a patient met with most often in the last year has a great impact on their likelihood to make a gift charitably to you, right? But to the level of detail of this provider has greater impact than this provider, or this department, or this specialty. And so it allows them not just to get a full understanding of what are these models built on, but also how do they put that to use? How do they identify relationships with certain providers, because those providers are connected to the highly grateful patients that, again, can support that organization in the future.
Yeah, I'd only add to that. Because we work in the nonprofit sector, trust is essentially the currency by which nonprofit operate. So there's no transfer of goods or services. It's really about, I'm going to give you money. So trust is not something that we take lightly. And with that has really been our commitment to no black box from kind of at actually a pretty provocative time when a lot of IP was created and black boxes were created to protect the IP. We took a very radical approach to say, how can you trust something that you can't explain? How can you trust something that you can't interrogate? That was really, really probably a definitive moment when we decided to pick DataRobot, because not only that we can know and see every variable that's, what features are being created and what features are being used, our clients get to see all of it. So they become part of the model build process. So we have several, kind of human interventions during the model build process where clients get on the call and we say, here's how it's performing with your data. Here's how it's performing with your data and our data now. And then along the way, as we operationalize this model. So having that full transparency and essentially the core of what, DataRobot was built under is really, pretty transformative for just our organization, but for our sector in general. But looking at what DataRobot's doing in Gen AI, following those same principles of transparency, explainability is actually very reassuring.
Now, obviously, the topic of the talk is around Gen AI, so I'm curious, and either of you can take this. How are you thinking about building out your roadmap to better understand which problems to tackle next, and then how does trust play into that decision making?
Well, we know that knowing who's going to make that next gift allows our clients to be more efficient. Right? They're not chasing individuals that have no likelihood, but they still don't know how to take that next action, right? They don't necessarily know how to reach out. They don't know the right messaging. They don't know the right output or connection to make that case compelling to get a gift from that person. So by being able to take the predictive of knowing who, combining with the generative of knowing how, allows them to really go full circle on executing on that use case that they're coming to us for.
Yeah, it really goes to your slide where you're talking about kind of the intersectionality between predictive and gen. And I'm biased in this because we started in predictive, and it's like the core data science of precision over personalization. And gen is amazing, right? We all use it, and we're often in our homes by ourselves with our dogs. Oh my gosh, that just happened. It's pretty transformative, and it's cool as data people to have those moments. But if we kind of project out a little bit, generative AI on its own is it really represents more, right? And in our world, who wants to receive more direct mail solicitations at their house or more emails because people need your money? No one wants more, right? We want precision. So it's really the truly, I believe, and there'll be the grand wake-up call for the industry at large will be a year or two from now when we realize more is just more. But when we apply really good predictive on top of Gen, now we get deep level precision and deep level personalization at scale. That's huge. I think it's really those two things coming together that is just going to, make so many things possible that have never been possible before.
Absolutely. I think we should continue on this thread too. Scott, you and I were talking earlier about the difficulty of adoption. Once you build a highly accurate model, how do you actually get the predictions in the hands of end users? And one area we were exploring is the ability to help translate some of the predictions and the explanations into a more human understandable format. Do you want to talk to us a bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, we again have clients, and primarily in the healthcare space, that are coming to us and say, all right, well, now we have these scores, we have these predictions, and I know that Justin has a score of 80, but what does that mean? Why? Right? And we can go back to the prediction explanations that DataRobot offers us, but it might be the standard deviation of time between meeting with this specialty and today is 3.2. there's nothing actionable or translatable there. So by being able to apply the generative AI to look at the prediction explanations, look at all the data behind that individual, and turn it into a narrative, turn it into bulleted sentences of, here's why this person is so highly likely to make that gift, and also here's the message that you could convey to them to compel them to make that gift.
Anything else from you?
No, I think that covers it all.
Perfect. The other thing that we were discussing earlier was how you can incorporate generative AI or predictive AI rather, to monitor the output of generative AI. So imagine we have a chatbot, or you're using generative AI to create content, potentially draft an email or craft outreach. How can you guarantee the quality of that output? And because DataRobot, like I mentioned earlier, is just really natively good at building predictive models, you can actually train a predictive model to govern the output of whatever it is you're creating with an LLM. So I'm curious, what factors do either of you consider in terms of risk when you think about deploying Gen AI solutions? How worried do we need to be about the output?
Yeah, well, and again, I would say our sector is a little bit different in the sense that there's really nothing to fall back on. Trust is, hard won and easily lost. And so, for us, I would say, privacy is like job number 1, 2, and 3. So really, when we evaluate any new use case for anything that we're going to do with our clients, we really take it first and foremost from the sense of, will this, either foster and instill a sense of trust, or could it diminish trust? So we're a little bit different, I think, in that way. We have a lot to lose very quickly, and so we take a pretty conservative approach from that regard. But at the end of the day, like Scott was saying, we have incredible insights that we're providing on ongoing basis. But what is the last mile? Like, Gen AI can be the last mile of actually taking those insights and actually bringing them to fruition. Those are things that we can do with high levels of trust when we know what is going into both the predictive and the gen side.
Amazing. All right, so we've got about 2 minutes left here. I'm going to have one more question for the two of you before we wrap. Curious, what use cases are in your hopper now that you're most excited about?
Ooh, that's a good one. There's a lot of data. We are a data provider, a modeling provider, and even when a client purchases our services, they still don't know how to start, right? A lot of the organizations we work with are small shops, so they don't have a data analyst, right? They have a person who's doing data as one of the 5 hats that they're wearing. So by being able to take this data set, take this noise, and being able to convert it into something where they could just go in and say, hey, I'd really like to look at a list of the top 300 people most likely to attend this event, without having to know how to pull the levers and switches to get to that end result.
Yeah, and I think, from the way I look at it, from both internal and external. So on the external side, where our clients, they get lots of data. We have 800 data points on every household in America. It's totally overwhelming, right? It's like, here's our summary, and it's just a huge, list of data. Gen AI obviously is a super simple, opportunity to take that and consolidate it and turn it into like practical, useful information. I think that's, something where we've got in the hopper right now that will be coming out actually very soon. In a pretty standard use case of Gen AI, just aggregating lots of data. The other part is internal. It's like, if we look at all of the data and analytics that we have on a client, and we get all of their data on an ongoing basis. It's like, what's the health of my organization? Like, am I going to meet my future objectives based on all of the different activities that I've got, emails and phone calls and face-to-face meetings and text messages and mail? Gen AI's ability to actually just take all that and produce a very simple report, be like, you're on track, like, keep on doing what you're doing, or like, hey, time out, there's some red flags here, you need to pay attention to this, in a way that people can digest without looking at 20 different dashboards with like lots of cool, looks like an airplane 747 like dashboard. Like, those are cool, but they're not very helpful. And so that's, I think, both internal and external are things that we're really looking forward to.
Absolutely. Amazing. All right, and with that, I've got one more slide here. We are out at booth 210, which is actually right outside these doors. We're doing plenty of demos if anyone wants to stop by later today or tomorrow. And with that, Scott and Nathan, thank you so much. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for being here.